Today I'm talking with Sabrina Joy, the founder of Ahimsa Choice Wellness and a self-proclaimed recovering stressaholic. Sabrina has utilized her journey through managing her stress and dysregulated nervous system to turn this around and not only regulate and find ways to help herself, but also help her clients. So through today's conversation, we'll talk about some of the practices that have helped her immensely and some of the practices that she works with her clients on. Some of the ways that we can re-regulate our nervous system. And a lot of it we're born with. A lot of it we have within us. We just need to be taught the ways or be reminded on how important these things can be for us. So I really hope you're getting something out of the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Sabrina Joy. Sabrina and I met in an event a number of months ago, and it was so funny because we were just kind of going around talking about why we were at the event and, you know, some of the stuff that we practice. And when Sabrina spoke, I had not met her before. She, you know, said her name, and then when she practiced, immediately my head was like, "Boom! All right, that's a person I need to have a conversation with," you know. And then this healing world, like there's a lot of different modalities that are opportunities for us, and I think it's very interesting when you are exposed to a lot of modalities and the opportunities to talk and learn about these modalities, when you start to find that intuitive thing that you're drawn to, that you didn't even know was a thing, right? And so that's what, I mean, as soon as Sabrina said her name and the thing, I was like, oh, cool. All right, we're going to have a conversation. This is great. So Sabrina, just before we get into it, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we made time to sit down together, Adam, and I just can't wait to get into it with you.
Yeah. So Sabrina is in the local Washington area, the greater Seattle, say Kirkland area. So not too far from where I'm at, and is also a podcast host or former podcast host, healer. I mean, there's so many cool things that you do in this world. And I think, you know, the reason I say all that is because, like, when I meet people that are exercising their abilities to just add to the value of the world, I don't want to say content because I don't like content creators. I think that like kind of minimizes the effort that gets put forth into the things that we do. You know, and it's like you do a lot with the time that you have, right? And I think that's really beautiful when we have the ability to share those passions in healthy ways with people around us. It's kind of like that bodhisattva idea, right? Like, found some cool information. I'm not holding on to it. I'm going to try to share it as much as I can.
Yeah. I think that's just been such a touchstone for me. And I think that, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes when we find tools that are really fruitful, it's almost impossible not to share them. When we find things that really work, and are so transformational for ourselves with very little cost in energy or very little downfall in pursuing that path, it's a testament to how excellent the tool is, I suppose, that then one just can't help but turn around and share.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, it would probably take me all the podcast to list all the things that you do, because like I was going through, you know, the past couple of weeks, just, you know, your website and all the beautiful things that you do. And I'm just like, man, I thought I was busy. You are just wearing so many hats and doing the things, which is beautiful again. But, you know, one of the things that, you know, again, the thing that really drew me to you is the nervous system regulation specialist practices that you work with. And the fact that your company's name is Ahimsa Choice Wellness, and Ahimsa is one of my favorite of the yamas, right? You know, the non-harm and the you know, just being healthy to yourself and to others. And so what kind of, you know, what got you to the point of wearing all of these hats of wellness, of healing modalities? You know, we kind of joked about it before we hit record, but, you know, I find most people that I've talked to that are passionate about what they're passionate about is because it saved them from, you know, whatever darkness they were going through. And so if you don't mind, you know, I'd love to hear about your journey and, you know, maybe some of the things that you've had to confront to get to the point to where you're at now.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a very long and roundabout story and complex, just like life is. Right. But I always say I am a recovering type A individual. So I was brought into this world pretty high functioning, and as an adult have come to understand that I was definitely experiencing ADHD as a kiddo. But my way of expressing that was just by being plugged in to basically everything all the time. I was really blessed as a young person and as an adolescent to be pretty academically gifted. And so the school system that I was in, I grew up in the San Juan Islands, pretty small, hyper competitive space. And so that type A, that hyper driven, and some would probably say hyperactive sort of orientation to the world was fed. And it became a really fascinating feedback loop that just helped me to get to a point where there was a really seminal event that I can share about in a moment that happened in my life. And my nervous system was completely shot at that point. So I had been doing all of the things in high school. I remember looking back, hindsight is 2020 always, but now especially knowing how the nervous system functions in that really important time of life where things are being set into motion, right? For how your physiology is going to exist later and how you're going to orient to the world. I was waking up at 5 a.m. doing jazz choir. I was a published musician at that time in my life. So I was playing gigs, I was working as a barista. I was helping my parents with their business. I was pulling that 4.0 GPA, taking AP classes, all the things. And I just remember looking back again, knowing what I know about the human body now. And I was so sick on a consistent basis, but I would just push through because I had no other choice. I suffered from really severe chronic migraines. And my coping at that time in my life was music. And then later into my adolescence, I found movement and I started to add that. And so at that time in my life, I was publishing music. I was going to go to music conservatory. I went from this tiny little island and I moved all the way across the country and I lived in a high rise in St. Paul and attended a private music conservatory. And whoa, like everything that was hyper driven was blown way out of proportion in that experience. And my hypersensitive reality, going from a small island town to living in a high rise in a studio apartment with my then boyfriend, now husband, it was a lot to process. And that was when I think God or the universe or however you want to orient just kind of offered me a way to manage. And that was yoga. In the same building on the very bottom floor, there was a YMCA. And I had done yoga as a kiddo to manage scoliosis. I had pretty severe scoliosis. So I only knew it as a way to manage a very physical anatomical challenge. So I went to the YMCA. I was having some neck pain from all the practicing that I was doing at that point in my life. And I came out of it not only feeling like there was a lessening of that chronic pain, but suddenly I could take a deep breath. And I think we've all experienced, as a yoga teacher, I know you've had students come to you and when they have that moment of just that first full 60 minutes to move in a cohesive environment, it was different than what I had interacted with and how I had interacted with yoga in the past, but it was also that same profoundly healing reality. And then later on, when my music conservatory shut down, very unexpectedly, I remember I got the email and I was like, is this some sort of really demented joke?
An email. That's terrible.
Such a fascinating moment. And so many people have those moments in their life where the trauma of it makes the memory so vivid. And I will never forget getting a call from one of my student friends. And he's like, no, this is real. We've all invested, how many thousands of dollars in our time and it's gone. And for me, all I had known at that point in my life was music and being hyperactive, just doing all the things. So suddenly all I had was my then boyfriend, husband, who was doing his own schooling and he was busy and I was way away from family and I had yoga. And there was a studio up the road that was doing a teacher training. And I just thought, in order to cope, I have to do something. I can't sit here and wait for the next thing to happen. I can't do the instant pivot. I need to move and I need to find a way to get some community support. So I did that teacher training, and yeah, I guess the rest is history. That informed the schooling that I pivoted into. It's a huge tool in my nervous system regulation work. And I later went on to do yoga therapy training. I've been teaching for many years now, and it's just become so much a part of how I can orient to the world. And like I said, that moment of trauma, it was the starting point of a really interesting, probably 2 years where I was having consistent panic attacks and just feeling like I don't know how to orient in this way. And I think yoga and faith were the only ways that I didn't literally lose my mind.
Right. Wow.
In my mind.
Yeah, it's so beautiful to, it's because it's so funny because one usually leads to the other. Yoga, faith, yoga, something like that. Not usually, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of times we do hear that correlation. But it's, I just want to come back real quick to the to your high functioning abilities, right? And I see that so much in our budding adulthoods, right? Anybody from mid-teens to early 40s, right? There's so many people that were misdiagnosed from my generation with, parents that didn't want to have to take accountability for little Johnny's, erratic behavior. So it's like we just coddle that and we just manage that, but we don't actually get the help that it's needed, whether it's, ADHD label, the medicines, or blah, 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 right? So I wanted to ask you, were you medicating at all as a youngster, through your ADHD? Okay.
Not at all. And it's really fascinating. My dad has ADHD, my brother has ADHD, but I think because, and I think specialists will attest to this, often people who present as female, people who present as male, they have different ways that they present that sort of ADHD reality. Right. And oftentimes young girls are just socialized to cope in a manner at which they're not having that sort of erratic behavior, and it gets channeled into more of that like hyper-focus reality, right? So looking back again, it's just so fascinating. There were those study spaces where I had to work so hard to overcome my reality and my neurodivergence because I just couldn't be bothered. Like for math, for example, I could not focus in those classes. I would fall asleep. I would check out because I didn't have that interest to help me click into that hyper focus. So it was really one or the other. And I didn't have any tools to manage that neurodivergence until I was much, much older, because I was doing well also, right? I think that's the bane and also the blessing. If you're functional as an adolescent, sometimes it can compound and then all of a sudden it's like a landslide later in life. And just for myself, that was my reality, that no medication. I've never been on medication. And thankfully, when I finally realized that this was actually my reality and got that insight, I already had a really strong meditation practice established through my yoga journey. And I think that's been so wildly fruitful in not only making peace with my sort of neurodivergence and my hypersensitivity, but also in managing it to a certain degree.
Yeah, you've hit on so many beautiful points that I want to unpack. But I mean, I think the one that you said about just being a woman, in having these symptoms, it's so it's been blaringly obvious for many, many decades. I think finally we're starting to understand the severity of the way that this research has always been done, and we're looking at the research groups. It's usually white males. That any kind of medication, any surgeries, let's say pre-2000s or so, was very much white males, right? And white males are a very specific group of people that are not women, that are not people of color, that are not any of these other things, that also take a lot of, we have to take that into account with hormones, with genes, with all that stuff, with the way that these medicines act with us, right? So I think that's it's so unfortunate that was something you had to manage. But I want to also unpack something too, because I see this a lot with our, like you say, we'll look at the the high ranking acronyms of the acronym army, the CEOs, COOs, blah 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 of the world that we look at, whether we idolize openly or we just look at them and maybe subconsciously idolize. A lot of those folks are high functioning people that are managing traumas in some kind of way. Like you said, you were succeeding at what you were doing, right? You were at your wit's end. You had migraines, you had all this stuff, but you still found, right, community success, right? This is the civilized success that we look for, climbing the ladder, making these moves and all this stuff. So, it's so hard to look at yourself and to understand that, like, this is a trauma response. I can't stop. I literally physically cannot stop and slow down. But I keep getting championed by working myself to my wit's end. And then we look at the people like Elon Musk on TV that say I sleep maybe 4 hours every 2 days, and I'm the richest person in the world. And now we have people that are idolizing that mentality, whether they have the neurodivergence or not, or the drive or not. It's like now that's pedestalized, and it's like, what are we actually saying to our community, and what are we saying to our youth out there? Work your ass off and maybe cross your fingers you'll actually make enough money. Or how do we support ourselves and our nervous system, not worry about the finances, but just actually our personal well-being, and then we start to fill in those gaps as we go.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, Adam. And I think there is a cohesion between both of the points you just made about that sort of gender data gap that's such a real reality, especially for healthcare and adjunct healthcare practitioners, when we're looking at how people are presenting. And then also there is a real and true data gap in that reality of we see the outward facing success, but we don't see the cost. Everything has a cost. In my pivot journey, when I was coming from music to working in mental health and healthcare, I took a little stop off in environmental economics. And that I was like, maybe I want to do this because I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And there is a really fascinating term in that world that is, the cost of externalities, right? Externalities in the environmental world, or any time that something is created, there are costs that you can count, like the financial costs and so on and so forth. But then there are costs that are, unless they are very intentionally gathered up and accounted for, they fall to the wayside. And that's so much the reality with high performance. We see the costs, maybe financially, maybe the time cost, but oftentimes the cost to our body or nervous system is offset so many years into the future that we can't properly account for that. So in the moment, it looks like, wow, what a win. Yeah, what an excellent valedictorian walk, but she was in her puberty and she wasn't sleeping at all, or we see CEOs that are performing at these extraordinary levels, but they've been divorced 4 times.
Right, yes.
So, right, there are so many externalities that are just not appropriately accounted for. So maybe it's that gathering together, zooming out and looking at the true reality of what's going on.
I love that. There's a book that I read recently. It's called The Good Life, and it's a breakdown of what's called the Harvard Happiness Study. And it's kind of analytical. Have you heard of it?
I'm familiar with the Harvard Happiness Study. Yeah,
it's such a beautiful thing, and it talks about how it was mired in what we just talked about, white males, blah blah blah. So it talks about how that was how the program started. It's grown, and so it's really really front facing about like the hurdles they've had to conquer over this 80-year time that this thing's been going on. But to your point, out of all of these people that they studied, I think there's about 2,700 people now in this study. Out of all the people that they study, doesn't matter how much money you make, what your social status is, like how many cars you got. None of that shit matters. It doesn't matter. It's how your relationships are in your life. And like, are you estranged from your kids, or do you have loving people in your life? Do you say thank you to the barista that just gave you the coffee, look that person in the eye, or just grab it and go on with your day looking at your phone, right? And these are those, like, from the small relationships to the big relationships. That's what makes people happy, is the connectiveness in humanity. And so, like, that those trauma responses of just put your head down. My somatic system is shut down. I can't even look up at a Fred Meyer when I'm walking around. So I'm looking at my feet. I'm running in and out as fast as I can, praying to God I don't have to talk to anybody, getting back in my safe car. And then I'm just going to and so it's like we're barely even living the lives that we have because we're so just responsive. We're just constantly responding to all these things that are going on us. So with all of that, like, how does a nervous system regulation kind of practice work? I mean, there's so many opportunities for our nervous system to be activated, so how does one work with you? Like, how do you approach, a client that comes in to talk with you about this stuff?
Yeah. So my practice as a nervous system regulation specialist, I sit in two different mental health clinics, one in Kirkland, Washington, near to where Adam's based, and then one in Edmonds, Washington. And folks come to that space often because they've hit that point that I experience and that so many of my students and just everyone, it seems to at some point experiences where you cross beyond the threshold of your body's ability to cope with that fast-paced, hyper-stimulated lifestyle that you're talking about, Adam, right? Everything is so fast all the time. The ability to cultivate that richness or even just basic health and coping skills is beyond many individuals' reach. So folks come in, I utilize a lot of different skills and tools. So I'm trained in MBSR and yoga therapy. We do yoga nidra or NSDR, right? All of the lovely opportunities to downregulate and get used to what it feels like to just be in that downregulated state. And then my long-term goal is really to empower folks to utilize those tools in their own body. I always say what I do is like building wells. So my great-grandfather was a dowser. And so they would walk around with, it's kind of like actual magic. They walk around with sticks and they'll find water. Mm-hmm. Fantastic, incredible thing to watch a person do. And so the first thing that I have to do with people is we have to find the water, right? So I have some of the skills and I know basic approaches that tend to work, right? So first we come in, we have to find the water. How do we get to that place of downregulation, right? Then we have to dig the well. So we have to get down so that it's easily accessible on a consistent basis, right? And that is honing the different tools that work from person to person, right? And those tools can be things like minor motor movements, major motor movements, different meditation practices, orientation. I work really strongly to try and dismantle dysfunctional breathing patterns that can exacerbate that state of chronic dysregulation. And that's generally something that happens in the first or last 10 to 15 minutes of sessions. We just touch base, just like you would with a physical therapist. My husband works in physical therapy. You're touching base. How are the exercises going? How can we continue to perpetuate in a positive rather than a dysfunctional direction? And then once we got the water, we build up the walls and I teach folks how to pull it up themselves, right? And that's when those tools that we've established by that point in time, they start to settle into the bone marrow and they become part of the reality of life. They become so much like walking or breathing, right? Because this is something that I'm already working on. Something that is there for them in those moments where many of the folks that I work with suffer from acute anxiety, right? They're having panic attacks, they're struggling with anxiety or insomnia, and they're having these acute sort of sensations, IBS, fibromyalgia flare-ups, whatnot. So in those moments, it's so important to feel like you have a place to turn,
right?
A tool to utilize. Otherwise, you feel as if you're in free fall. And for those individuals, it's just that becomes a really challenging feedback loop to step back into regulation if you feel disempowered in moments of pain.
Yeah. I love the way that you talk about this because the metaphoric way that you speak about it, like I think allows people to really to paint that picture in their head. 'Cause some of this stuff can be so esoteric and so like seemingly like far reaching, like, crystals in my pockets and smoke and sage. And like, don't get me wrong, that's all my jam. But like some people, it's like, I don't know what to do with that. Right. But I think this can help, And so like, I love the water and the building, like the way that you speak about it, because like we all know what finding water looks like, right? We all know what a puddle looks like. So we can really kind of picture that in our head. But I think you touched on something that I really love, and that I was just driving the other day in my car, and I was just, one of those random thoughts. And I read a book a long time ago called The Art of Impossible by Stephen Coulter, and it talks about the zone, right? So how we scientifically, some of the studies about the zone. And I read that book years and years and years ago, and I love it. I love the ideas that they come up with and how they talk about the zone and all this stuff. But But the reason I bring it up now is because I think, like what you're talking about, like teaching folks how these tools, right? Hey, here's a way to breathe. You didn't even know you were breathing wrong, right? Not wrong, but you didn't even know you were triggering something by the way you were breathing. So now here's a way to downregulate by the way you're breathing. Here's a way to slow down. Here's some light therapy, right? So all these tools, right? That once you know them, it's like, oh man, that makes so much sense. But having somebody show it, right? So the reason I say that is because like, okay, so have you ever learned a new language?
Yes, I speak French semi-fluently. So
Okay.
I speak E2 level. And I speak about this all the time, Adam. I know where you're going.
Cool, perfect. All right. So when you're learning a language, you're constantly decoding it in your head, right? So parlez-vous français? I say in my head, do you speak French? And then oui, then I say yes, right? And then I going back, right? So I'm constantly translating back and forth. So I'm thinking about the modality while I'm doing it, right? But then eventually I spend enough time in France and I'm just speaking French. I don't think about the English translation. I don't think about how to translate this back into French. I'm just speaking it. And that's kind of the magic about this is we integrate it so much it becomes part of our life. We stop thinking about how to breathe. We just know we breathe. We know that inhale through the nose is calming and exhale through the mouth is calming, right? We know how to upregulate by breathing through the mouth, right? These are things that once you start to know them, it's like that gnosis with the G, right? You become the practice. And so the reason this hit me so hard is because like, if you think about people that just get it, like a Joe Dispenza, or if you look at musicians like an Eddie Van Halen when he was still alive, it doesn't look like he's trying to play the guitar. He is the guitar. He's just it's a part of him, right? And that's what these practices, they are an extension of us. We've just forgotten about it, right? So having somebody like yourself remind us and say, hey, look, you can do this, right? You're your best healer. I'll hold that space and I'll teach you some things. But when it comes down to it, I'm not standing next to you in that elevator when it jolts and you get a little panic attack, but you know what to do now, right? Mm-hmm. And so the more that they reinforce that dialogue from people like yourself, man, I love that. Thank you for the work that and you make it sounds like you make it so approachable too.
Well, I want it to be so much of my education, especially it really started to sit in for me when I started to look at how often, and we're so blessed to live in the time that we do, where these really profound practices are starting to have fantastic hard science support behind them. And I don't want to say that all good things have hard science behind them. By no means do I want to say that. But I do have a logical mind and I love to understand the why. And when I started practicing and understanding Buddhist psychology, and I sat down and I was like, wow, okay, these lists, this way of orienting, it's just you take the scientific method, you test it, and it works. It's fascinating, right? And then when I did my yoga therapy training, my lineage is out of the London Biomedical Trust. And so it was so grounded in physiology. And I just realized every time I did something and came with that depth of knowledge to understand the why behind it, it became like remembering, right? And it's just like what you're saying. Often when I'm trying to help folks understand the work that we're doing, I'll say it's very much like remembering your native tongue that you've been moved away from, especially when we're working on interoceptive awareness, right? When we're trying for folks who have desensitization or they may be very far removed from the sensations of their body due to trauma or whatnot. That remembering, that feeling and listening to the language of the body is just like remembering a mother tongue that we've been moved away from when we were like 4 or 5, right? The skills are there and it sits in the depth of our soul or our mind, but we just have to remember how to speak it. And if we learn the grammar tools as an adult, if we learn the science and the reality behind it, we can start to feel empowered when we remember the language. We can speak it not like we would have when we were 4 or 5 when we learned it, but like a fluent and competent adult, right? And then that's the language of our body. It's the remembering and the understanding when they click together. It's just beautiful.
Yes.
It's good.
I love that. And that, so, and even just like, the way you're speaking about remembering, take the word apart, remember. And what you're doing is you're reestablishing the member of their humanness, right? And it's helping you remember yourself, right? And I think that we're so and not in a nefarious way, not in a like aliens erased our memory kind of way, but we're kind of lost, we're lost in our abilities to remember things that we know in a deep cellular way are beneficial to us, because we don't, like you said, we don't have the scientific backing for it. We're lost generation because we hang our hats on so many things we feel like we do know, but we don't really understand that we're still very, very ignorant. Like, a lot of the knowledge we have isn't that old. Like, we didn't even know that dinosaurs were around until 200 years ago, right? The first dinosaur bones were found in 1822, right? Before then, fucking people were just living their whole lives merrily, drinking wine and doing medieval shit, right? Nobody had any ideas. So, like, what do we not know ahead of us? Like, where's our ignorance lying? And I think a lot of it is in these seemingly esoteric practices, that now that we have some instrumentation to put something on there and say, oh, look at that. Oh my God, your estrogen levels are going down, or your testosterone's going up, or whatever it is, right? By this singing bowl, or by this chant that you're doing, or by this breath work that's being provided to you. It's like, come on. I think that for somebody like myself, it allows me that opportunity to really lean into my ignorance. And when something is presented to me that I might have in the past, which I have in the past, I was a very ignorant human being, may have laughed off or turned aside and be like, no. Now it's more of like, okay, well, how does that feel within me? Because there are definitely things that I'm like, yeah, I'm 100% into that. And now there's things I'm 100% not into that other people are. But that's because now I know how to listen to myself, right? And so, like, I champion the things that you're doing, because, like, some of this stuff probably was written off so long ago as woo-woo, as, haphazard bullshit, right? And now here's the thing that people are like, I want to do breath work. I want to try psilocybin because now it's not illegal. It's decriminalized. I want to try cannabis because now it's not illegal, right? We have these opportunities to try these different modalities.
Yeah, I think you make such a fascinating point in that orientation towards these tools, which can feel foreign, sometimes scary. If you have a very logical base, they can feel wacky sometimes. To get into it, you have to have some sort of degree of humility. I think that's what you're articulating, that the openness of, like, maybe I can't get it all, but I can understand to a degree that I might skillfully utilize this and take that which is fruitful, maybe leave that which isn't, in a way that's respectful of the tradition, the lineage, the space from which it comes. I think learning to orient that way is really challenging. And what it requires, like all good things, is to slow down. You have to slow down to think critically. You have to pause for a moment. And I found this in myself. I think my journey with yoga, coming from a faith that is not aligned, as I'm not a practicing Buddhist, and I am a practicing Buddhist in my psychology, but not in my faith. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a practicing Hindu. These spaces are foreign to me. And so coming in, I had a closed mind. I had a degree of arrogance in which I was like, I'll take this. I'll take anything that's back with science, but anything that's not, I'm probably going to leave that because it's just a little too wacky and weird. But I think as over the years, as I've felt in my body the reality and the efficacy of some of these tools and ways of orienting and being, I think what you're saying is so true, that orientation of humility and open-mindedness is so fruitful, because healing can't happen without it.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think it was maybe Einstein that said that you can't fix a problem with the same line of thought through which it was created, right?
Yep.
And that's so true in health. It's so true in health. My husband is always on me about orienting and gait patterns and all of these manners of movement and the physicality of which, if you continue to perpetuate a movement style, it's just going to continue to perpetuate the disease, right? Or the diseased way of being. And that's the reality of our lives. Yeah. So a different degree of orientation is required to heal.
Yeah. I love that. So with all the practices that you do, as far as, the regulation of the nervous system, do you have like go-tos that you personally practice, to help get you back into a space, after, because, like I was saying earlier, sometimes we have all these tools, right? But the practitioner it's like, so like being a Reiki practitioner myself, it's like, who do I go see for
Mm.
Reiki, right? So like, what are the practices that you, being the practitioner that holds the space, what are the things that you kind of lean into as your go-tos right now?
Yeah, I think it really changes over time. And I think for the rest of my life, I will be getting to know my nervous system. And that's just our reality, right? Because every time that something occurs in our lives, our nervous system changes, right? And our default is adjusted. And for a while, I had practices that I utilized, and then to a certain degree, they get to, they taste like, I can't drink grape soda or eat grape candy because it tastes like medicine, right?
Yes.
So sometimes there is that fruitful reorienting, right? There are breath practices I won't do now because I know I use them to get out of panic attacks. And so they taste like panic attack to me, or worse or better. So I have a desire to let them calm, and then I'll use them in the future, right? I know they work. I know the physiology of them works. And this is something I try to reiterate to clients a lot, that life is so dynamic. And so we have to be dynamic in the way in which we orient. Something as dynamic and to a degree esoteric as the nervous system, the ANS that we're speaking about here, we have to be dynamic. So right now, I've been practicing a practice lately that's really lovely because I spend frequently full days counting breaths with people, being really nerdy about the physiology and trying to get to down regulation, that I can become a little bit anal about my breathing. So there's a practice by, I think it was Willow Blythe Baker, in The Wakeful Body, which is a book I'd recommend to anyone. It's a fantastic book, especially for therapists. And she encourages individuals to sit and practice letting the body breathe. And it's really, I think to a certain degree, it's an advanced practice because you have to, I think you go through the journey of regulating, of doing your Dirga pranayamas, doing your count breath, your cohesive breathing, all the things. And then to a certain degree, you get to a point at which it can be fruitful to just let the body breathe. And so I've been experimenting with that lately. And just when I sit down, I've been allowing myself to just notice, okay, how is the breath happening? And it feels very similar to like that Buddhist orientation of just watching the breath, right? Not modulating the breath, but it's a more somatic approach. So it's coming from literally feeling, what does it feel like for the diaphragm to begin to contract? What does that feel like? And not to be in control of it, but rather to be that objective observer, to just get to experience the richness of the breath. That being said, I've been getting really nerdy about my CO2 tolerance as well. So I've been doing some wacky Buteyko stuff. And that is a counterbalance, right? Because I can't stay sane and do that Buteyko, the breath practices, and really worked my CO2 tolerance if I don't have that counterbalance of just allowing the breath to happen, because I never want the breath to feel clinical. I want to feel like it is that well of goodness, that it's just every moment affirming my aliveness. And so sometimes there has to be a hands-off balance to that. Yeah.
I love that, and I think that so I have a lot of clients that microdose in different ways. And I think, one of the things that I personally microdose, but one of the things that I have experienced with that medicine, for example, is that you've got to experience time away from it. Right. And I think that's the best advice is like, your fix can become the problem, right? Your problem solving thing that's like, oh my God, I found this thing. Like meditation, for example. Like I remember when I first started meditating, you could not find me in lotus position somewhere, right? I was meditating like 7 hours a day. I was just hiding basically in my meditations, thinking I was doing good, right? But it just became another addiction, and so I think we got to be very aware. And so I love that you're talking about it like that. But you did say something, I was going to cut you off, but I wanted to let you go. But you said something that I think is a very unknown statement, and I think we need to have more conversations about that, is that your nervous system changes when it's charged, right? I don't think people realize that. It's like, say you've been doing like self work, right? And you used to like say, I used to be an angry person, and somebody says, "Hey, Dad, I got in an accident," and my immediate reaction is like, "Oh, you son of a bitch, you're an idiot," and blah blah blah, right? I'm angry. I'm not supporting you in the situation, right? And so, like, I'm doing some work, right? And I'm trying to listen to my body and try to catch those angry outbursts. But every once in a while, it's going to come out still, right? But I'm more aware of it. I'm changing that, right? So as our nervous system changes and as these things charge us, sometimes that initial reaction might be the thing we still go to because we're just so used to it. But our bodies are changing, and so maybe that change gives us like a split second to make that change, and that's one way or the other. So I'd love to, if you could like kind of unpack that idea of how your nervous system changes. Like, say like somebody passes in your life unexpectedly, and all of a sudden, like now you're, allergic to something that you hadn't been allergic to before, or, you're crying at the freaking dog, adoption commercial on TV, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I love that I get to work with the ANS, that autonomic nervous system, because it is, we can dissect the body and we can see the CNS, your central nervous system. We can see your nerve ganglia. If we look at it with little microscopes, like we can understand that. The autonomic nervous system is so rich and complex. I think it's fascinating because it is a reflection of the reality of the world. Mm. It is so good, and it has so much potential to be a problem, really and truly. And if it is misused or disused, it perpetuates disease states. It can do wacky things to your body, like you're mentioning. It can wreck your autoimmune system. It can cause autoimmune diseases. It can cause really just obscure, weird things to arise. And those can come up all of a sudden, or they can come up over time. But I always say, and I speak so much in metaphor because it helps me to understand, when you put a pot of water on the stove and you turn the heat up, it's not going to boil until all of a sudden it's boiling, right? But the whole time the heat was growing. So much of the nervous system is like that, right? Often, unless it's a very severe moment of trauma, and those happen, they totally happen. But for most of the folks that I see, it's compounding little moments every day. It's not having the time or the space or the tools or the guidance to move skillfully, so that every day you misuse your nervous system. It's like if you drove in the wrong gear on a manual car all the time, or maybe 5 minutes a day for 10 years. After a while, things are going to start to fall apart, and it's going to feel like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden my car is broken. But it didn't happen overnight, right? You didn't hit a tree, probably. It was over time, there was just this manual disuse. But there's so many different areas in which our nervous system can be impacted. It's those interpersonal relationships, like you're saying. Major losses are so impactful on the nervous system. Moments of extreme change. I mean, everyone experienced something during COVID. Mm-hmm. Even if it was just a reorientation to the world, that can change your nervous system.
Wow.
It's so fascinating how even just learning how to orient from a place of curiosity and care on a blanket approach can radically downregulate your nervous system. And that's not like a breath practice. That's not an event. It's a way of mentally orienting that can affect your physiology. And so really people need to understand that from the moment they wake up, frankly, from the moment they started breathing, when they came out of their mother's vaginal canal, their nervous system was impacted, and it's impacted every single moment of their life until the last breath that they take. Is the nervous system radically impacted by everything? No. But it's constantly seeing, perceiving, adjusting, and modulating every moment. And so naturally, it's storing information, it's storing ways of orienting, like you're saying. It's creating those neural networks or those samskaras of functioning, right, in response to stressors, to moments of rest. All of this information is being gathered, utilized, and if we aren't stepping in and taking a compassionate and skillful role, it can just run out of control.
Wow. Yeah. But I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I'll start off by I read a study about sleeping a while ago. And, a lot of us have problems sleeping. Fortunately, I have no problems. You throw me in a corner, throw me in an airplane middle seat, I can fall asleep, no problem.
You're so lucky.
I know. For whatever reason, I've never had a problem sleeping. But I know that that's a big, big problem. My kids my kids have problems sleeping and stuff like that. But, and so a lot of us turn to melatonin or some sleep aid of some sort. And, a lot of those meds have been around for long enough to do some good, solid research on. And one of the things that they're finding, and I read the study in this book called Why We Sleep. Sleep is very beneficial. Like when we sleep and actually get into a sleep state and go between REM and non-REM sleep, our body is doing a lot of repair inside, right? I like to think about it as like an internal janitor crew, so I got my like guy coming out, sweep out the liver, we're vacuuming out the lungs and all that shit, right? Because we're in rest and digest. Our body's not in fight or flight. So, but if we're medicating ourselves into a sleep state, whether from alcohol or a sleep medicine of some sort, we're basically just shutting the lights off, but we're not letting the janitors out, right? And so your body goes into stasis, but you're not actually sleeping. You're not actually getting the benefits of your nervous system resetting. So is that something that you have to kind of help people with is sleep? That's such a, we talked about people championing 4 hours of sleep every day or two, right? I for many years, I maybe got 6 hours of sleep a night, and that's probably 20 years. And I was like happy if I got 6. So is that something that is also, you're having to coach your clients with, is that, just proper sleep, practices?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Adam. And it's something that is really near and dear to me because there was a time in my life where I was absolutely dependent on melatonin. And it was one of those ill-informed, unskillful coping mechanisms in late high school, early college, taking melatonin to fall asleep. And especially in high school, I was working at the drugstore. I was a barista. So I'd wake up, do an early morning shift, go to school, do an evening shift. I'm just medicating all day to keep myself awake and then medicating at night to fall asleep. And it's so fascinating because people don't seem to think critically about the reality that anything that we put in our body is impacting us and has the potential to function like a drug, right? The only difference between a drug and natural substances are how much we know about them and how long we've evolved alongside them, right? Just because it's natural, just because it's a supplement, doesn't mean it doesn't have the potential for significant harm if it's used unskillfully, right? And that's the case for everything. I think I had told myself, and so many of my clients tell themselves, oh, it's not a problem to have a glass of wine to fall asleep. It's totally okay to take a couple of melatonin. I'll just have a coffee in the morning. I'll just pop an ibuprofen to cope with a headache from my hangover because I had a little bit too much wine last night to fall asleep. Suddenly, these things that feel like they're just little things, they're over the counter, they're not even drugs, they have a cumulative impact because we're not allowing the body to figure out what's actually happening. But again, what's required so often with my clients to fix sleep problems is slowing down a little bit. That is such a hard ask because my ability to perform at that time in my life where I was 5 or 6 coffees a day, popping 2 or 3 melatonin to fall asleep, it was what so many people, I constantly was like, wow, oh my gosh, what a superstar. Look at you overachieving. But I was sick all the time, was so dysregulated. And I didn't know that a year later, I would develop severe panic attacks. And so many of my clients are in that space too, right? So first thing is we have to skillfully, always with the aid of a general practitioner or a psychiatrist or someone who's helping them move skillfully through microdosing or whatever they're utilizing, coming back and just letting it be bare for a minute, right? Just a lot of the folks that I work with are women. And something else that a lot of them are going through is I work with a lot of gals who are moving into those childbearing years where they're starting to come off of birth control for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Right. And that is a even more extreme situation in which you've been medicated into this cycle and then you have to come off of it. And it's so confronting, whether it's birth control, melatonin, sleep aids, drinking, weed, whatever you're self-medicating with to fall asleep or to exist in the world or to not have horrible cramps from your menstrual cycle. These tools are helpful and so skillful and useful when used with awareness.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, sometimes we have to take it back. Like you're saying about microdosing, it doesn't work unless sometimes you take a break. It's so important for us to meet our realities. And that sucks sometimes.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
Yeah. That sucks sometimes because sometimes it's like, okay, we're not going to use the melatonin to fall asleep. We're going to try breathing practices.
Right.
Breathing practices don't work like melatonin because you have to use the body to regulate the body. And that takes so much patience. It's like learning a new language. You don't just download it and then voila.
Right.
So I think that that's an important thing to orient to anything, and especially to sleep, right? You're saying we have to set the nervous system up to actually be in a state in which the janitors can come in. That's such a great metaphor. And it's so true. If we turn the lights off and lock the doors, then nothing's going to happen.
Right.
But unfortunately, if you haven't let the janitors in for 6 years, it's going to be a dumpster fire. So if you just keep turning those lights on and off at a speed at which you can't actually pause and just look around and go, oh my word, there is a degree of discomfort in just being like, okay, maybe for the next month, as I learn to regulate, I'm actually going to get worse sleep.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Well, and you made oh, go ahead, Sue.
No, but just then it's on their own, right?
Yeah.
It's their own choice. Yeah.
Well, you made a good point too about how we're not really in a society that supports us to have those like listen to ourselves kind of days, right? I have 2 daughters, right? 20 and 16, and both of them have, started to go through their cycles, and so waking up and having to go through an entire day, right? You got 8, like you just said, right? Go work a morning shift, then go to school for however many hours, go work a night shift. Doing all of that when I don't know what it feels like, but doing all that with menstrual cramps, that I've heard is fucking horrible, right? So, but our society's not set up to where we can wake up and have that be like, oh man, I am nobody. I'm not going to do anybody any good right now to be guest facing, right? And so like, I would like to have a day to myself. Our society doesn't do that. Oddly enough, I just read an article about this company in South Korea that it's a pretty big company. I can't remember how many employees, but the company, on top of their already paid for PTO time that they have, they're also now adding on 10 voluntary call in for whatever you want days every year for every employee. You can just wake up and be like, I'm not feeling it today. And you don't have to have an excuse. You don't have to have a reason. You just call up your old boss and be like, hey man, not doing it today. Cool. All right, good, man. Have a good day to yourself, right? I love that as an idea. We used to joke around in restaurants, because restaurants, we're all shenanigans, and people would, go out on boats all day long and then come in for their shifts and then be like, God, I didn't want to come in. I was sitting on the boat. They used to call it, I wanted to call in awesome. I'm having such an awesome day. I don't want to come into work. And I'm like, I wish I could give that to you, man. I really wish I could. But so it's cool to know that there's people out there that are looking at it differently, whether it gets on a big scale or not. But I think that, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is beautiful that we can practice it, but is it acceptable in the world that we're living in, to where we can really on a national level and a worldwide level slow down, take some breaths, understand, what's going on, how we can get back up to baseline, because we didn't even realize we're so far below it.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Adam, and it's a huge conversation that has to be had.
Yeah.
I think this is something that continually is a frustration for me, and that many of the folks that I work with, just in the world of healthcare, right? In order to help someone, you need to make sure that they can utilize their insurance or afford the service, right? So that automatically excludes so many people, because they have to have the resources, and time is a resource. So if you don't have the time to practice some of these skills, in the same way that insurance might exclude someone who doesn't have the financial resources to work with me, time is an exclusionary factor as well.
Right.
So that's why when folks come to work with me in the medical intake in the first session, it's a very real discussion that I have with folks. Like, is this going to work? Or is doing this work going to be another stressor in your life? Because if that's the reality, we're not doing it. Don't pay me.
That's a beautiful point to make.
Wait until it's the right time. And I think it sucks to hear, but sometimes in our life, we have to, if we don't have that great job where they give us 10 days, to just call in and have a fuck it day, then how can we learn to cope with how challenging it is, just like the reality? And I think to get back to menstrual cycles, often when women are coming off of being medicated, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. The 3 days moving. How do I even exist? How do I function? And sometimes my answer to them is like, maybe you just get comfortable with not.
Wow.
And that's hard, but it takes, and not in a suppressive way, but in a way of like orienting with compassion, empathy. This is my body, and it's so hard to menstruate. And for non-menstruating people, it's so hard to be alive with how fast the world is. Like, how can we give ourselves that day off on a moment-to-moment basis? Right. Just orienting with compassion and care. And Oren J. Sofer, who has been so impactful in the way that I orient the world, he's a meditation teacher, and he teaches NVC, nonviolent communication. He uses a phrase of like providing empathy to yourself. Putting on your own therapist hat. If we can do that from moment to moment, then maybe we can alleviate the sting of not having those, 10 fuck it days, right? We're just being like, oh, it's so hard right now. Yeah, it's so hard right now. And that's just kind of the reality. And yes, it sucks, but it's okay.
Yeah. The acknowledgement of it. It's like so many times we're not even going to, I don't even look at how bad it is. I'm not even going to look. Right. But now we're acknowledging not how bad it is, but we're giving ourselves the grace to listen to our bodies here and say, hey, actually, Brene Brown has this beautiful talk where she talks about how her and her husband meet every morning over coffee, and they give themselves progress reports for the day going into the day. Right. And so say Brene Brown sits down and she's like, hey, I'm feeling good today. I'm like at 85%. Right. I'm got good energy and doing right. And her husband sits down and he's like, hey, I'm feeling like 60%, right? So she's like, cool. All right. So now I know I've got this much, I've got to carry it a little bit today because, hubby's not he's not feeling well. So I've got to carry a little bit more. I know that going into it. It's not like, 3-4 hours into the day, I look over and my husband's like, not putting dishes in the dishwasher and I'm all getting upset about it. He's already told me he's not feeling good. So now I have that knowledge, right? And so it's that constant check-in with the self of like being able to understand and hold space for yourself when you're not feeling good and not making yourself feel like I'm at 50, but I'm going to fake it at 100. Okay. How do you support yourself to 70? Right? Is it like a latte? Do you go for a walk on your break? What kind of kindness can you show to yourself to just nudge it a little bit, but also just acknowledge the fact that it's okay to not be at 100%. That's totally fine too.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important skill, in that I love Brene Brown, and so much of what she talks about has such a strong undercurrent of like self-awareness, right? Be vulnerable. It's skillfully. We have to understand like, when is it safe to engage in that manner? And that's kind of what the progress reports are about too. It's like, how can you be self-aware to the degree at which you understand your own needs, you understand your resources, and then you orient skillfully? That takes having like the right container too. And I think so much of what we're talking about today, Adam, is like, these are not quick fixes. Making sure that you have human beings in your life that will be supportive of a skillful, like down regulatory environment at home, so important. But you can't just do that overnight, or creating that skill set of checking in with yourself and being okay with being uncomfortable. If you do that quickly, it doesn't work. There's a repression in it. So learning the skill to orient with that compassion and grace, it's like a long-term skill that takes a significant amount of time and effort, and being okay with failing. And I think that's really what it's like to work with the nervous system. We're talking so much about orienting in that manner and how we can create healthy nervous systems. I think just coming with that sort of timeline is so important because it doesn't happen overnight. Just like creating a relationship in which you can be like, I'm at 60, I'm at 40, let's support each other. That takes a certain amount of time. If you take that model and you put it inside, the different parts of yourself have to learn, how do we communicate? What is an indication that someone's not performing, right? Like if we're learning about ourselves, oh, I'm having pain in this part of my body, we have to first learn that one, that's an indication of something. Maybe it's chronic stress or tension holding or a movement pattern that's dysfunctional. That's one part. And then we have to support that part. We have to support that pain. So taking that model of the progress report inside is so fascinating. And also it takes the time and the grace and effort and patience.
It does. And beautiful souls like yourself to hold that space. I think that's the messaging is so beautiful. I've worked with so many people in recovery, and the first few weeks, first few days is really tough, and there's so many times that we think that, okay, I've removed this substance, now I'm going to be okay. Well, there's some unpacking to do because you've got the amount of work to get back to a baseline because of the substance that's with you. But then you also have the reason you started the substance in the first place that we got to unpack, right? So it's like that time, like we've got to give ourselves time. We're not instantly gratified by all this shit. And, science, right? The science behind the journey is it doesn't matter reaching the goal. The goal doesn't matter. The goal is what it is, right? You'll get the high and then you'll lose it. But the journey to get that goal and all the shit you go through and the stuff you learn about your nervous system, about the people that you can support, the practices, that's the special sauce. Right. And so it's like, embrace that time, embrace the time, because that's where all the magic happens, is in that time that you're taking for yourself, to show yourself that you matter, that you care, because either for yourself only or for the people that are around you. Right. There's a reason you're here on this planet. Let's figure it out. Right. Let's get to a point of a baseline to where we can actually breathe properly and see what's actually in front of us, so we can move forward as an adult, as a human being that's going to contribute to this world in some kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so often there are skills that we think are a means to an end, but then when we really get into them and we get good at them, we recognize that the ripple effects are so much bigger. Regulating and finding a healthy nervous system, it's not just about not suffering anymore, not being anxious and alleviating some of the symptoms. It's what you're saying, Adam. It's about being able to engage in those big picture things. Like, what is my purpose here? And how can I live a fulfilled life? And how can I look back, whether it's tomorrow or 20 or 40 or 80 years from now when I'm on my deathbed, and say, it was actually okay. In the big scheme of things, I feel okay with what happened to me. That making of peace with reality, that's what it's really about. Yeah.
Well, man, I didn't think you could put a bigger bow on this one. That was beautiful. Just tie it on up, throw a little label on it, be like, hey, this is for you, world. This is the best little present in the world. I love that. Well, Sabrina, I'm so happy that we had a chance to finally have this conversation. Like, I'm so happy that you're doing what you're doing, and I'm happy to know that you're very aware that you're a high functioning human being that does a lot of things, and I know that you're supporting yourself in the ways you need to. Where can people find you to learn more about you? I know you do a podcast, or you've done a podcast in the past, so where can people go to look for you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I was a podcast host for like the longest time, and it got to a point where I was recruited to do too many other things and see too many clients. I don't get to have these amazing conversations you do, Adam, anymore. So I'm so glad to get to be here with you today. If I ever started again, folks can find me. They can also find old episodes of the podcast. It's Ahimsa Choice on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Those are awfully old though. So if folks want more information, or if they're interested in working with me, they can go to my website, ahimsachoice.com, and that's AHIMSA choice.com, and they can book sessions. There's lots of blog posts on there that hopefully are fruitful and are free and easily available. And there's also some guided meditations when we're talking about those functional tools, those really concrete tools, folks can try out, get started with.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. And I'll, leave a lot of that information in the show notes as well. So, but Sabrina, thank you so much for all that you're doing, for all your learning, for the help that you do, the space that you hold. I deeply appreciate your contribution to humanity.
Oh, right back at you, Adam, really. And just, it's such an important role gathering together people to talk about important things. So thank you for doing that and for holding this space. It's lovely.
Thank you so much. I look forward to our next talk. Thank you so much for joining Sabrina and I. Please check out the show notes for ways you can get in touch with Sabrina or learn more about what she's doing. Also ways that you can listen to and support the show. Obeisance and love. We'll see you next time.